Well, welcome to Community Christian Church. My name is Ed Martin. I'm one of the pastors around here, and we are so honored that you came to be with us today. If you're with us for the very first time, we hope you have a great experience while you're here. In fact, you probably already noticed a lot of people in green t-shirts or blue t-shirts. They are here just to help you have a great experience. Don't get out of here if you have any questions without asking one of them to try to help you. Community Christian is not a place where you have to dress up. It's not a place where you have to fake it. It's not a place, even if you're a church person, not a church person, that you have to believe what we believe. We believe that God is for you and not against you, and that we believe everybody is welcome because we know no one's perfect. And we're thankful you came to be with us today. Now, if everybody would, if you guys would reach down and grab one of these cards, it was on a chair nearby, it says connection card on it, there's a pen nearby. Would you go ahead and begin to fill that out? And I get, if you are a guest with us today, this is the part where you're a little uncomfortable and you wonder, what are they trying to get my information for? Well, we honestly are going to contact you, but we're not going to spam you, or we'll end contact whenever you want us to. But we want to thank you for being here. We have a little gift we want to give you. But we want to reach out mainly to say thanks for coming. We want to try to answer any questions that you have. And really, we'd like to pray for you. See, Community Christian, our staff every week takes these cards, we divide them up, and we pray for every person that gives us a name and whatever information they're comfortable giving us. And we would love to do that for you. You've honored us with being here, and we'd love to pray for you this week. So at the very end of the service, when I'm done in a little bit, we're going to drop these in the offering. And if you're our guest, when the offering comes by, would you please just consider that all we want you to put in there is this. The offering is for people who consider Community Christian to be a part of their life. They give to support what we do here so that we can serve people in the community. With that in mind, I do have one announcement that I need to make about something on the back of the card. One of the things we love to do is help people in our community who are having trouble making ends meet in our church family. So if you're a person who right now is having a difficult time, maybe doing routine car maintenance, and that takes money that you could use for other things, we would love to help with that. So on the back of your card today, it says, I'd like to receive car help. If you check that, here's what's going to happen. We're going to contact you this week, and we'd like to know what kind of help you need. We have a group of mechanics who we can't do major repairs, but we'd love to help you with your routine maintenance, like rotating your tires and doing oil changes and changing brakes and other routine things like that. So if you will check this box and drop that in the offering and give us a number, a way that we can contact you this week, we'll reach out to you. And the reason you can't just show up on Saturday is because we have to know what kind of parts your car needs, what we need to get for you. And the people sitting around you in the offering, they've given money to buy those kind of things. And we would love to help you, but you have to check that box and drop it in the offering when we're done in just a little bit. Well, today we're starting this series, Asking for a Friend. A few months ago, we started telling people in our church, hey, you can ask any question, you get friends to ask any questions. And for the next 3 weeks, we're going to try to answer those questions. Now today, just to kick the whole thing off, we wanted to ask the most asked question, and it was asked in a lot of different ways, and it's a question a lot of us have, but the way we're going to deal with it today is this way. Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Now that's a question that many of us have, and I guess at some time or another, all of us have at least thought about. And the reason I think we all think about it is because if we were God, the way this thing works is not the way it'd work. We would only have bad things happen to bad people. One of my all-time favorite stories, and I haven't been able to verify whether it really is true or not, even the internet doesn't seem to know whether this is true or false. It's about a lady named Vera Chermak. This story took place in Prague back when it was in what was still called Czechoslovakia. Vera's husband came home one day and told her that he was leaving her because he'd been having an affair and he was going to go with that other woman. And then he promptly walked out of their third floor apartment. Vera was so distraught over what she'd been told by her husband that in just a few minutes she walked over to the window of their apartment and jumped out of the window. Now, what she didn't know is that when she jumped out the window, by that point, her husband had had time to get downstairs, and when she jumped out, she landed right on top of her husband who had come outside. It killed him, but his body broke her fall, and she was only a little injured. Now, don't you love that story? I love that story because if I were in charge, that's the way things would work. Cheating spouses would get what they deserve, and people who are faithful, they'd have everything go well for them. If people work hard, then they'd get good rewards. Good students would get good grades, and cheating students would get caught. And people who do the right things, good parents they'd be able to have the amount of kids they wanted to have when they wanted to have them, and all those kids would be little angels. That's the way it'd work if I was in charge, if you were in charge. And if this question was really that kind of light, if it were really just sort of a philosophical thing that you and I could all talk about, this would be a really easy discussion this morning, but it's not that kind of discussion. It almost never is. In fact, I can tell you that in all the years that I've been doing this and the years that people have asked me this question, which is over 30 years now, I can't think of one exception to the rule that it's never just philosophical. In fact, now when people ask me why do bad things happen to good people, if I'm talking to them directly, what I ask them is, why do you ask? Because it's almost always when something happens to us, something happens close to me. And when something happens close enough to me that hurts me deep enough, then this question comes up. It was when your dad died. It was when your mom passed away. It was when she walked out. It was when you lost everything. And then there's this question. And in the middle of that moment, when pain and suffering hits you, in the middle of that moment, there's a question beyond that all of us, I think, ask at some level, like, God, what were you thinking? Are you there? Do you care? Does it matter if we pray? Are you paying any attention? And then there's the deeper question. If you are there, is the problem that you don't care or that you can't do anything? Do you care about what happens to us, but you're not powerful to do anything? Or are you powerful and you just don't give a flip? You see what happens and you don't care. See, this is a really important question because for some of you with us today, this isn't academic to you right now. And this is really personal. And for others of you, it is academic. It might not be academic the next time this question hits you. See, is there a way to believe in a good God, a good, great God, and not have to deny the reality of the world we see around us? Do I have to pretend that I don't notice the evil in our world to get at there being a good, great God? Do I have to maintain my current view of God and just ignore all the stuff I see around us? Or do I come to the more disturbing thing where I see reality and I believe that the God I have always believed in, He doesn't really exist? Here's what I want to say to you clearly. When you see reality, it is a stupid thing to deny reality. You should look at reality. You'd be wise not to ignore reality when it's before you. But the question you should be asking is, if the God I always believed in doesn't match up with that reality, who then is God? Who is this God? If God's not the God who brings all the children home at night, if God's not the one that hears my prayer when I say, God, guard, and protect us, if God's not the one that answers every prayer the way I want it answered, then who is this God? Now, if you're atheist or you're agnostic, you see the same thing everybody else sees. You live in the same world we do, and your heart breaks just like everybody else's heart breaks. But there's something in the middle of it when it's breaking that you want to look at your believing friends and say, explain that. This is the kind of thing I've been talking about. How can you see this kind of stuff going on? How can you watch this kind of suffering and still believe what you believe? This is what I've been saying to you. These kind of things couldn't happen and there still be a good God. The reason this happens is there is no God. Give it up. This is reality. Stuff happens. It's random, and just get over with it. See, you see the same stuff we did. You lined up in a different place, but could I push a thought at you for a minute and ask you to think about it? Could it be that when you see what we see, that when you see reality, that actually you have the same problem that all of us have? And by that I mean, you have a God that you believe. You believe that if there were a good God, if there was a God, he would be like this, she would be like this, it would be like this, that all things would happen good and good people would have good things happen. You believe this, and then you see reality, and you've come to the conclusion this God doesn't exist. Well, maybe you're right. And the question you should be asking is not, well, this is just random because there is no God. You should be asking, is there any evidence outside of this pain that shows there's any evidence of any kind of God? Not the one that I created, not the one that I believed in my own mind. Is there any kind of evidence of God in the reality I see around me? But I also think that before we get into the philosophical kind of part of this, it's really important for us to acknowledge that this question, why do bad things happen to good people? It goes way beyond a belief system. It goes beyond it. This question is personal to most of us. See, the reason you ever were interested in this question goes back to when you were a kid and you didn't have a good father, and your home was not a place of love and support. It was a place of pain. Or you ever really thought about this question of suffering until she broke you. Not she broke your heart. She broke you. Or you and your wife, you'd always wanted to have a child, and when that child was born, it was like the best day the world has ever known. And when that child died, it's like the worst the world ever gave you. I mean, it's like the deepest pain a person could get to. See, this question of pain and suffering, it has some interesting philosophical, academic kind of edges to it, but for most of us, it is not academic. It's not philosophical. It's personal. And I think at the outset, it's important for us to acknowledge that often our personal pain motivates our private conviction. It's often our personal pain that motivates our private conviction. And the reason that's important to acknowledge is that as we talk about this, if our personal pain is to win the way, it skews the way that we look at evidence. And by that I mean, maybe you can see this as this. If you come to me and try to tell me there's a problem with one of my grandchildren, I am way too personally invested in that for me to listen to your evidence that other people can plainly see. I'm way too personally, emotionally experienced with that. It skews the way I see the evidence. And we need to acknowledge that. So, why is there evil in this world? And there are a lot of answers to that. Let me start by talking to you about a couple. Because, see, here's what we need to realize. This question of why do bad things happen? Why does evil exist? Why is there evil and suffering in our world? This is not just a question for those of us who believe. This is a question that everybody has to answer. No matter what your belief system, everybody has to come up with an answer to this because everybody sees what the reality of our world. It's not just Christians that must come up with an answer. And of course, atheists come up with an answer. The answer is evil exists, but God doesn't exist. That's the answer. Evil cancels out God. There can't be no God if there's evil in the world. That's a big one in our world. And you notice it all the time. I mean, these days where we're in this purely kind of world where more and more of people believe, there's nothing outside of ourselves. There's no one to turn to. We have to turn to each other. And you see it every time there's like an active shooter or there's, somebody's gone into a school. You saw it when there was that tragedy in Florida earlier this year. And your friends that that they don't have anything to call on outside themselves, they almost have to steal from God people when they post on social media, and they'll say things, offering positive thoughts for the families involved. Positive thoughts? To who? Who are you offering those to? And what good does it do? See, everybody notices, and everybody has to answer. In our world, there's also a lot of Eastern religions and New Age kind of philosophies, particularly in our culture. And the way they answer this question is that God certainly exists, but evil's just an illusion. And the idea that you'll hear in a lot of these, and if you listen closely, you'll hear it all around you these days, is that if I can just deny the problems that exist in our world and I can get in touch with God that is out there and in me and in everybody around me, if we could all just get in touch with that, then we could create nirvana, and this evil that is an illusion that we've created for ourselves, it'll just go away. And let me just say to the believers in this room, those of you who are followers of Christ, this thought of evil being an illusion, it's crept into so much of modern Christianity that people with big smiles on their face sell books over. But this is not Christianity. I mean, I hear it all the time from people of, there's a woman I can think of she and her husband were a part of our church for a while, and then she got really involved in another church that was more one of these, let's just be positive, let's get in tune with the God that's in us, and you have to deny these kind of things, and God all of the good in life will come from that. And I saw her, and I heard that her husband was sick, and I asked how her husband was doing, and she asked me if I would go to the hospital and visit her. And then she said, I asked the people at my church to go to the hospital, but they said if they go to the hospital, then they have to acknowledge the sickness that he's involved in, and to acknowledge it gives power to the sickness, so they have to deny its existence. When you see reality, you're not very smart to deny its existence. See, there's a lot of Christianity, or what's going in the guise of Christianity, that says our words create things. Jesus gave no thought that that was true. There's nothing in the Bible that indicates anything like that. So that's the New Age, kind of Eastern way of thinking about it. God exists, but evil is just an illusion. So those are the two big ones really at work in our culture, but you didn't come here to hear me talk about those, so I'm not going to talk about those for a long time. You want to know, this is a church, what do Christians believe? So let me give you the Christian answer, the one that I believe at my core, and this is an answer to why our world is the way that it is, and why you are the way you are, and why I'm the way that I am. See, Christians believe that evil and suffering in our world comes from the paradox that freedom creates. See, the Bible teaches that God is all-powerful, but that God chose not to be all-controlling. That God has all power, but He chose to create human beings, and a part of what it means to be human is He gave us freedom. He gave us freedom to choose. And that freedom really flows out of, the reason we believe that we have freedom is because it flows out of the very nature of who God is. There is, at the core of Christianity, this understanding of God. God is love. Not that God does loving things, not that God is justice or God is power, but God at His nature, these other things, these good things, they flow out of His very nature, which is love. That's how Christians understand the core of this universe, that there is a God who is love. Now think about for a second how love works. Love only works when there's freedom. Love only works hand in hand with freedom. If you're a parent and you have more than one child, you've seen this at work in your children. Two of your kids get in an argument and you come in and you break it up, and when you get it all settled down, you say, now turn to each other and say that you love each other. And they go, love you. And you think, well, that don't look much like love. And of course it doesn't. Because love can't be forced. Love can only be freely given. Love only grows in a place where freedom truly exists. Love only works when it's free. See, I can't force somebody to love me. I can manipulate somebody to love me. But I can make them take care of me, but I find out eventually that I didn't get what I wanted. What I wanted was love that was freely given. And with freedom comes the ability to choose. I'm free to love. I'm also free to hate. I'm free to give, and I'm free to take away. I have this great capacity for good. And I have this enormous capacity to do evil around me. I mean, we all in us have the power of good and evil, not just out in the world. We have it in us. And getting to this is the first step to understanding how Christians understand suffering and evil in our world. This explains this endless cycle that's been going on in our world and humanity forever. You see this in the history of our fighting and destroying each other, and then we rebuild each other, we come back together, we give to each other, we love each other, but then we take and we pull away. We have everything we need on this planet, then no children will be hungry, and we have things to cure diseases, but instead our greed holds it back because we have the ability to love, but we have the ability to destroy and to hate. At the center of our universe is this paradox of freedom because of love. And in the middle of that, we have the ability to love and to forgive and to do good. But I also have the ability to get hurt and to nurse a grudge and to allow all the bitterness to grow that'll lead to all the evil that comes in our world. Now, the truth is, whether you believe in God or not, you've seen that reality too at work in our world. The ability to love and to hate. You've seen that work out. You've seen this paradox at work in our world. Now, no matter how much you love somebody, you can't make them love you back. You can't make them do what you want them to do. You can, again, manipulate them, but in the end, you find out you didn't get what you wanted. What you wanted was freely chosen love, but you have to let them be free. You can't manipulate that. You've seen it in your children. You've seen this immense ability in your own kids to love each other and to create and to do good for each other. And you've seen them lie, steal, and hurt each other. And if you haven't seen that in your own kids yet, somebody else has already seen it. You might be too emotionally invested to see the evidence. And you know, it's not just other people. What we just described, that's in you. That's in me. You've chosen to do good at times, and you've chosen to do evil. I've chosen to do the right thing, and I've chosen to intentionally hurt people. Christians say the reason that's true in relationship and true in our world is because at the core of our world is a God who is love, and He wants love to rule. But love only happens where there's freedom. And that's the paradox that creates suffering. You say, well, okay, I've seen that paradox at work, but even if that's true, it's not loving to let terrible, bad things happen to people that you love. The suffering causes harm, not good. No good comes out of it. But you and I know that's not really the whole truth. Sometimes good does come from it. Malcolm Muggeridge, who was a journalist of the last generation and an avowed atheist, near the end of his life, he wrote this: I can say with all truthfulness that everything I have learned in my 75 years in this world that has truly enhanced and enlightened my existence has been through affliction and not happiness. In other words, if it were possible to eliminate affliction from our earthly existence by means of some drug, the result would not make life delectable, but to make it more baneful and trivial to be endurable. The reality is that you and I, we go through pain and suffering, and it has the potential to make us much stronger. And when we stand back and we can look at it at times from distance of years in our life, we can see it, but sometimes when we're standing so close, we can't. And it's not just Christians that see this. Malcolm Muggeridge, he saw it. He was an atheist. Malcolm Gladwell, in a recent book, cites the lives of many successful leaders in our current generation that they've succeeded as leaders in our world, not in spite of the challenges that life gave them, but primarily because of the challenges that life gave them. He says, can dyslexia turn out to be a desirable difficulty? It's hard to believe that it can, given how many people struggle with the disorder throughout their lives, except for a strange fact. An extraordinarily high number of successful entrepreneurs are dyslexic. A recent study by Julie Logan at City University London puts the number somewhere around a third. The list includes many of the most famous innovators of the past decades. Richard Branson, the British billionaire entrepreneur, is dyslexic. Charles Schwab, the founder of the discount brokerage that bears his name, is dyslexic, as are the cell phone pioneer Craig McGraw, David Neelam, the founder of JetBlue, John Chambers, the CEO of technology giant Cisco, to name a few. There are two possible interpretations, he says. There are two possible interpretations for this fact. One is that this remarkable group of people triumphed in spite of their disability. They're so smart and so creative that nothing, not even a lifetime of struggling with reading, could stop them. The second, more intriguing possibility is that they succeeded in part because of their disorder, that they learned something in their struggle that proved to be of an enormous advantage. Now, none of us can see that when we're right in the middle of it. None of us see it. When pain's happening and it's so personal and so close, we can't see it. But the truth is, we've seen it in other people. And we have to admit that the possibility exists that even pain and suffering can bring about good. And even though there are situations that are so deep and so dark that I can't see them, I have to admit that somewhere, even though I can't see it now, it might possibly exist. Alvin Plantinga, who's probably the leading philosopher in our day, proposes this idea for you to understand it. He says, if you go out and set up a tent in the wilderness, and there are these things called no-see-ums. Do you know what no-see-ums are? No-see-ums are these little bugs that you can't see, no-see-ums, but they bite in a way you know that they exist. He says when you set up your tent and you get the tent set up, if you look inside and say, is there a St. Bernard in there? If you don't see one, there's no St. Bernard in there. But if you look inside and say, are there any no-see-ums in there? The fact that you can't see them doesn't mean that they don't exist. And then he adds, let me read. Why, when it comes to evil and suffering, do we assume that when we're looking for meaning in it, it will be more like looking for a St. Bernard than it is like looking for a no-see-um? See, even though we can't see it in our world, in our problems, even though we can't experience in the pain that we have to admit there might be meaning somewhere in it. Christianity tells us that horrible things happen in this world. They come from the love that God has at His core of His being that creates love to flow in our world, but that love comes from the paradox that freedom also brings. God wants to bring about good through it. See, Christianity doesn't deny that there is God or that the reality that there is suffering, but it adds this one part. God loves us enough that God entered into our suffering with us. See, at the heart, at the very core of Christianity, there stands this central figure. God entered into our pain and suffering, and He embraced it. See, where Christianity stands alone in the marketplace of ideas among beliefs in our world is that God did not create our world, Christians say, and walk off and leave it. God loved us so much that at the core of who He is, He loved that He came to be with us. Christianity proclaims that God was not distant or removed, that He didn't just start it and put processes into place, that He came to be with us. He came and existed in human existence and suffered with us. He suffered like us to be like us. See, at the core of Christianity, there's one central fact. It's the cross of Jesus and the tomb of Jesus. The cross of Jesus and the empty tomb of Jesus stand as the place where at that place we get all the resources we need to wake up in the morning. It's at the resurrection of Jesus that we can wake up in the midst of suffering and say, I don't understand why this is happening, the awfulness of all that's going on, but I can continue to go on. That's where it comes from. And if you're here and you're like, I've lost someone, and they meant so much to me, my child is gone. What does the cross and the tomb have to say to me in that? God says, I gave up my child too. I know what it's like to have a child die. But death is not the end of the story. I want to redeem that. For some of you, it's abuse that you've been through, the pain of the abuse that you've been through. Jesus, God in the flesh, God come to be with us. He was abused publicly. When he hung on the cross, he was stripped publicly naked. He was publicly exposed to our world. Jesus has been where you are. Which leads to the question, why? Why would God humiliate himself? Why would God suffer? Why would God die in this awful way? Well, yes, Christians in part believe that it was to redeem us, to pay for our sins, but it's more than that. That's not the whole story. God came to be with us, to suffer like us, to enter into our existence, to be a part of what we did, and then to redeem the suffering in this world. See, at the very end of the Christian story is not the death of Jesus and his suffering. It's the resurrection of Jesus. And in the resurrection of Jesus, God overcomes death and he redeems it. And God, he wants to redeem your suffering too. And I know you may not be at a place where you can embrace that now, but I hope that your suffering hasn't got you to a place that you can't at least hope that it could be true. See, here's what I know. Suffering never leaves us spiritually neutral. It never leaves us spiritually neutral. Because of what I do, I have been with many people in the worst moments of their life. I have seen the worst of what evil and suffering can do in a human life. And I can tell you, none of us are ever the same after it. You either grow closer to God or you move further away from him. And some of you, you know the moment you moved. It was at your dad's funeral. It was when she walked out. It was when I had lost everything that mattered. That's when these questions wouldn't let me go. So what's the alternative? It's just a godless universe? Is that your alternative? You're being punished somehow? Is it karma? Does this reality you're feeling, it doesn't really exist? What's your alternative? You have to have an alternative. Here's the Christian alternative. The God who understands and entered into human suffering, embraced human suffering. He longs to embrace you. He knows what it's like. He knows what you felt. So here's what I want to ask you to do. Would you consider making one little move toward him? Maybe all that means is being open and maybe coming back and listening just for the rest of this series. I want to end my part in just praying for you, and then when I'm done, we only have just one little couple of more minutes, and then we'll be dismissed. And if you want to pray with someone personally, we'd love to do that too. Let's bow together, and I'll pray. God, I pray right now for people who are here that this is not academic. They did not come just to argue or to try to get some information for a philosophical argument. In many ways, this is deeply personal to them. And I know that you know exactly where they are. So I pray that you would do what I cannot do, that you would help them to know that you are there. They would sense that you care for them. And they would open themselves just a little bit to allowing you to embrace them and to walk with them in this life and through their suffering. Thank you for Jesus, for him coming to be with us. In his name I pray. Now, before we dismiss, I want you to see the question we're going to talk about next week. And we have a short video to show you that. And while we're watching that, we're going to receive the offering at this time. So if you're receiving the offering, if you're helping us with that, would you stand up right now? Let's receive the offering together and let's watch this video.